Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to July, which means we're starting our Deadhouse Gates Malazan Reread. For those of you that don't know, I do weekly videos as I reread one Malazan book a month. And if you're reading it for the first time, I will not spoil future books or future implications. I save that for a video at the end of the month. So today we're doing the prologue in part 1 of Deadhouse Gates. So if you're reading for the first time, you're in the clear. And if you're a lifelong Malazan fan, read the series already, stick around. I could use your expertise. But like I said, new month, we're starting the second book. All the videos of Gardens of the Moon are already posted if you want to check those out if you haven't seen them. I'm very, very excited about jumping into this book. This is one of my favorites, reading through the Book of the Fallen for the first time. And going in it with this more analytical mindset, I guess, because reading these rereads and doing the annotations and stuff like that, this one's a doozy. I feel like the start of this book is one of the classic things that people warn you about when reading Malazan. I kind of did this at the beginning of Gardens of the Moon too, when they're like, oh, it's super confusing, super lore dumpy. Then I kind of walked through maybe the techniques Erickson used to make it not so confusing and not as confusing as people say it is. The infamous thing that he does in this book is take you to a whole nother continent and introduce you to probably 95% new characters, new plot lines, new intrigue, and new things you got to invest yourself into, which can be extraordinarily jarring for readers, especially if you're reading such long books as long as these are. You're thinking, okay, we're sticking with Whiskey Jack, we're sticking with the bridge burners. I just wrote the book. We're sticking with the threat of this Panian Seer, Kaladin Brood, Animator Rake, these characters, Dujek, the armies, they're outlawed. What are they going to do? The Empress is going to get them? No. We're going to another continent where there is a rebellion brewing, and the only characters that we recognize really are Kalam, Fiddler, Crocus, and Absolar. That's it. I mean, we know of some other characters, and I'll get into that, but of the characters we care about, those are literally it, and it's only one storyline of the many in this book. So I understand why that's something that people warn people about. However, it certainly was jarring the first time I read it, but this time, because I was expecting it, and I love the characters that are introduced here, oh, it felt like coming home. It felt like coming home. I love the Seven Cities, and I'll get more into that too. You know what? We'll start with that. Introducing us to a new continent in the form of the Seven Cities, I think, may I be so bold, and not to put a damper on the rest of the series even. The Seven Cities, this continent, is the strongest setting, world building, tight, obviously all of Malazan's good world building, but the Seven Cities might be the best setting I've ever read in fantasy, period. Because Jenna Bacchus in Gardens of the Moon was good. Obviously, we got a lot of politics, we got a lot of the free cities, and but it really didn't feel like a living place. I didn't feel like I connected with it in its history, and even to this day, it still feels very generic, and the name could have been anything. It could have been any setting. Darujistan had a lot of character, but that was just one city on this continent, and I had trouble picturing what this continent looked like. What did Pale look like? What was that? We really didn't get a feel into deep setting world building, because there was so much other stuff that he was trying to set up. That is not the case in this book. I feel in probably this book more than any other, the continent is a character in of itself. It's obviously desert themed and hot, and it's kind of presented, and a lot of the characters go through this folly as well, as it's gonna be oh, it's the Dothraki from Game of Thrones, right? It's people that ride horses and they're shirtless and they got curved swords and they are brutish and they kill people and they're, you know what I mean? They're not civilized. And there's even a scene when we're introduced to Duker's point of view, where one of the generals thinks of them that way, but you quickly learn that their culture is extraordinarily complex, and most of them are extraordinarily intelligent. Obviously, there's people that are crazy, bloodthirsty, blah 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 blah. But especially characters like Bolt, Coltane, and then even thinking back at oh, Kalam and Quick Ben are from the Seven Cities, and they're some of the most quick thinking, smart, conniving people. This is a continent where you can really feel its history, and it's a lot of the writing around it is focused on its history and how old it is, and the past wars, and the cycle of it just feels living and breathing. And the magic system gets a little bit of a revamp and a new flavoring with the warlocks and the concept of if you die, crows come eat your soul and reincarnate you into little kids. What? It just feels so tangible. And I can't exactly point as to why that is, and like with all like the different like groups of people that live in the Seven Cities, like you got the Wiccans who like are fighting for the Empress, along with the Red Blades, but nobody likes the Red Blades because like they're kind of evil, but they work for the Empress. They're on the same side as the Wiccans. And you get people like the Grauls, who like Fiddler disguises himself as, who have their own culture. It just felt a lot more thought out and deep, and that's one of the first things I clicked onto in reading this, is that this continent, it feels like it existed long before the events of this specific book, and even the events of like the series and the characters that we've known. It just feels ancient, which is perfect for the book and like what this book is about. I just think it's the strongest setting possibly ever. I can't think of like more well-rounded, because there's so much aspects going on, like the religion of like the Shaik and the whirlwind, and like it's just, you know what I mean? And like that's not even like the full book, like it's a major part of the book, but like it just felt so much more thought out. And I think going into book 2 of the series, it's an outstanding jump just from like, and I think Erickson was a great writer from the start. I think the setting work and it just doesn't get better than this. And not to like make the other book seem worse, because like we go back to the Seven Cities, don't worry. But like it's fantastic and I love it. And that's not it. I just wasted so much time talking about that. Wasted? No. I spent wisely, because that's very important. The setting is incredible. And I just had to gush about that before I really got into like everything else that we're thrown into. But as I said, new continent, new world. We're not in Darujhistan anymore. We're not on Genovakis anymore. We're on this new continent. It's overwhelming. So what does Erickson do to guide us into this journey? In the prologue, he gives us a familiar face, or rather a familiar name, in the form of Paran and his sisters. We are introduced to them very, very briefly in the last book. If you're not expecting to see them again, you probably don't remember. He literally just visits them. He's like, hey, sisters. And like Tavor's like, yeah, like, thanks for leaving. Like, you asshole. Like, you abandoned us, basically. And he goes, well, I guess I did do that. And he leaves instantly. No character work, no background, no anything. No inkling of the conflict that we're immediately set up with. So we're given the POV of Felicen. There has been a culling of the nobles in their city, and she's in chains next to a strange priest guy and this big jack guy who just like is there. And we find out that Tavor is the new adjunct after the death of Lorne in the last book. And not only that, she basically agreed to send or arrest all these nobles and send them to this like slavery camps in the Seven Cities with her sister among them. So this conflict is immediately set up with the familiar name of the Parans. We like Captain Paran, so instantly we're like invested a little bit, and then we're getting this conflict of very, very simple sister versus sister, and then Tavor is presented as and there's even a line, which is a great callback to the first book, where Felicen says, it's not my sister anymore, it's the adjunct, which we knew was something that Lorne struggled with in the last book, of separating Lorne from the adjunct. Tavor seems to have adopted this adjunct, the cold, the arm, the empress, detached thing. And how other way to explain it if you're going to send your sister into slavery? And that's like the set of conflict of the book. And also introduces the character of Heberic, who is this weird priest guy who's covered in tattoos, his stumps for hands, and like this mass of flies like approaches him and then like disappears, and like it's supposed to be like a messenger from the god of death. And there's so much mystery, but what roots us into this conflict from the very beginning is the Paran sisterly conflict. And if you're not going to understand all the symbolism, like who's Heberic, who's his god Fenrir, what is the flies doing there, you could just latch on to that sisterly conflict. And the other interesting thing about Heberic we're introduced to is that not only is he a priest of this god that he fell out of favor with, he's also a historian who is like controversial for saying that the Empress is a murderer, and a failed murderer at that. To whose murder? It's not that. Listen, it happens this part, so we can finally say it out loud. Dancer and Kellenved are Shadowthorn and Cotillion. So basically, Heberic was on the blacklist because he's one of the people that said, like, hey guys, I think this is the case. I think that the Emperor and his assassin aren't dead. And it's revealed later that is the case. And for those of you who are reading through the series the first time, so you didn't see my last video, or like the series-wide recap of Guardians of the Moon, it was so obvious. And don't feel bad if you didn't know that they were like the Emperor is Shadowthrone, because I didn't the first read, but like if you reread Gardens of the Moon, it's so, they really just throw it at you all the time. But certainly the first time I read this, like that reveal was like incredible, with like Absalar realizing that she remembers Dancer, and then they're like, oh, if you remember Dancer, that's weird because you were pressed by the rope. Oh wait, they're the same person. So again, it ties into the thing last time, like, or last book, we were hinted at like the paths to ascendancy, and one of the other, I'm jumping all over the place, but one of the other major things introduced in this book is these shapeshifters in the form of divers and soul taking are going to this path where they think that they could be ascended. So this idea of like, it's kind of hinted at in the last book that like people can become gods. It's plainly stated this did happen once with Shadow Throne of Cotillion, and there are shapeshifters who want to become god of the shapeshifters. And that's where they run into like Mappo and Icarium, who is the second POV characters that we meet in this book, which is a strange one, I'll admit. When I read the book the first time, I did not ever understand what was going on with these two guys, and I honestly particularly didn't enjoy them very much. Knowing how much time we spent with them, I was more forgetting going in, and I love their storyline. But Mappo and Icarium are these like two friends who are like ancient. They are mentioned in Gardens of the Moon very, very briefly. But they've been traveling the continent together, and it's slowly revealed, like, it seems like, oh, it's just two buddies walking in the desert, and like, oh, somebody approaches them, but like, they're badasses, so like, you can't be beat. And then something will happen at the end of their chapters where it's like, Icarium's like, wait, what just happened? And he's like, don't worry about it. Or he's like, Icarium's like, I really want to like remember like what my child is like. And Mappo's like, no, you don't. Keep walking, buddy. And you're like, wait, Mappo, like, what's going on here? Because it's like an underlying sinister vibe. Like Mappo is hiding something, or he's protecting Icarium from something. At this point in the story, we really have no idea what's going on with these two. But I really love their banter and their dynamic. You could tell they're old friends. They have this rapport. And like, honestly, something I missed, even the whole first reread of the series, Icarium's kind of funny. Like, he like makes little quips. He's kind of lighthearted, and like Mappo's just he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders, poor guy. He's like, ha ha ha, it's so funny, Icarium. Like, please don't remember your past for an unexplained reason. And Icarium's like, haha, funny demon, looks like your uncle. Or he like made a joke, something like that. Like poor guy. Anyway, so we're introduced to them. We're not really sure where that's going, but then we're introduced to another point of view. Because you know what Erickson says, one's not enough. Felicen and her getting sent into slavery is not enough. We get back to Fiddler and Kalam. They reveal very, very early on that their plan was not to take Absalar home. As it was very heavily implied at the end of the last book, like, why would they go? Crocus is like, wait a minute, you're doing this because you want to kill the Empress. And props to Crocus for figuring that out on his own. He was smarter than me. But it's the case. Kalam wants to kill the Empress, and they think that the best way to do that is to basically cross the continent to the city of Erin, and then take a boat to the capital, and then assassinate the Empress. But they very quickly go off track when Kalam gets a little bit distracted and goes on a little bit of a side quest when he realizes that he has the opportunity to just start the rebellion that's been brewing, and everyone knows it's at this point it's like a guarantee that it's going to happen. Kalam says, you know what, I'll do it. I'll take the book. I'll start it on my own, which is very interesting because I think one of like the main conflicts of Kalam is like he's like, which is very subtle and not really focused that much on the book, I think, other than just like small snippets, small sentences, is Kalam is from Seven Cities. So he's battling like with like his, by being a Malazan, he's fighting against his people and against his heritage and his culture. So like by delivering this book, he is like rejoining his culture, but he also knows that like he has friends in the Malazans at this point. So he's a very conflicted individual. But he does this, and we learn that this was not part of the plan. Fiddler and him have a little bit of a tiff, so they're off on their own. And Fiddler hints that he thinks there's another way that they could get to the capital, and they just hope that Kalam succeeds in his journey. And we also learn that Absalar has retained some of the skills of Cotillion, which I think is hinted on the last book, which basically means certified badass incoming. Just saying. Other than that, that's the story we're familiar with. So immediately we're latching onto this sisterly conflict. We're latching on to, I guess we're not latching on to Mappo and Icarium, because like, what are they doing? We're latching on to the simple goal of kill the Empress time with the boys we know and love, which is very easy to get invested in. But my personal favorite storyline, it may not be yours yet, is the other major one of Duker, the Imperial historian. He's overseeing, or he's just like observing, I guess, the army as like they're really prepping for this rebellion, and they receive a new fist in the form of Coltane, a Wiccan, so he's a local. And it's obviously like there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of dynamics at play, but people dislike him because they're like, oh, he's like a local, he's gonna betray him, he's a savage, blah 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 blah. We learn that quickly, like Coltane and his like uncle question mark. They say it's a joke. I don't know, whatever. They are very intelligent, they're very smart, and we learn that Coltane is this very, very, very capable soldier, warrior in general, that Kellanved kind of like sidelined. And it kind of gives me the vibes, the way it's setting him up, of like Animander Rake. This guy's extremely competent. He's been in the shadows. No one really knows that much about him. What's he going to do when he enters the fray? And we don't really get to know that much about him personally. We learn more about him through this character Bolt, who like talks with Duker. And we learn that Coltane, through these drills, he's putting the Malazan army not through like battle scenarios, which you'd think of like rebellion, okay, armies fight. Refugee saving exercises. So you get the sense that Coltane knows a little bit about what's going to happen. They know the rebellion's going to start. He knows that they're going to have to be doing a lot of refugee saving, and that's the majority of things that they're focusing on. And we also get to see a scene where this like slimy guy, Malik Rel, tells them that the army has to go to Aran, which is the city that we know Kalam and Fiddler want to go to like be assessed by like the Fist there. So we're getting the sense that Aran's going to be a very important city in the later books, or in the later parts of this book. And then other than that, other storylines. So like Felicien gets sent to this slave camp where like they mine the odoral dust, and like we quickly like see like her descent, and it's so sad. I think she's like probably one of the most complex characters in the story, and like a lot of people dislike her, which I'm not really sure why that would be the case. Because she does things that are very unlikable, but it's very clearly telegraphed that like she's being sexually abused, she's become a drug addict, her sister is betrayed, she's very young, and like she has to sell her body to like the leader of this camp just to get enough food and shelter for Heberic, who's like old and like would definitely die. And like she's quickly losing herself like with this drug addiction, and like we just see kind of her descent, and it's very, very sad. And then other than that, we have the implication that Heberic is also like maybe important to Duker somehow, because he says to Culp that he needs to save a prisoner, and that prisoner is Heberic. So we don't really know what's going on there, and it's just so much. And to cap it off, Mappo and Icarium stumble upon this Temple of Shadow where they meet Iskaril Pust, who's like another like Krupp-esque character, where he's just like weird, and he's like constantly like making jokes because like he's like a dunce, or is he a dunce? Who knows? But we get the sense like just from his influence, like we don't know if he's like acting stupid or just like acting so stupid that he manipulates people into doing what he wants. But he's a very amusing character for sure, and just gives us a reminder that, you know, Shadowthrone's still around, and maybe Shadowthrone's got a little bit of like strings pulling on this continent. So in terms of like actual events that happen in this part, so all the storylines are set up, they start to move, and the big thing that happens at the end is Kalam delivers the book to Shaik, the whirlwind. The rebellion is about to start. This magical force is going to be backing them up. It's going to be a horrible war. They're going to grind each other to the dust, and immediately after he leaves, the Redblades who are hunting him kill her. She's dead. And the first time I read that, I was like, what? You set up this whole whirlwind, the rebellion's definitely going to happen, and then she immediately dies? It's crazy. But then like her bodyguards hint that like, well, is she dead? And they hint at this rebirth of some kind. So that, and then obviously the next part is called the whirlwind. So like one way or another, this rebellion is definitely going to happen. But I just think like those are just all plot stuff that I was just talking about for 20 minutes. Like I didn't even really get to like analysis. It just goes to show like how much really goes on in these books. And I think I'm looking for the themes like I found in Gardens of the Moon. I think it'll maybe take me a couple more parts to like really unravel like how these stories all connect thematically wise. But I just think it's such a brilliant, emotional, physical, like political stakes that are being set up. Because again, we're in a position in a Malazan book where we don't know exactly who to root for, right? Because after Dujek and Whiskey Jack get outlawed from the Malazan Empire, you would assume that Malazan is the bad guys. We don't care about them. And then we introduced the prologue. Yeah, a sister who sells out her sister to slavery. Boo! The Empire sucks, and it's heavily implied too that the Empress is messing this whole thing up, and that if Kalam was still in charge, he would have like shoved that rebellion down the trash and said, "No way are you rebelling against me." But characters are constantly saying like, "Empress is missing this. She's missing this. She's not acting fast enough. She's not using the right people in the right spots." And it's heavily implied that she's not that good of a ruler. And I remember reading this first time, like, I even got the vibes, like, my first read-through, like, she doesn't seem to be doing a very good job. Like, is this on purpose? What's her end game? So you just think that's like, okay, it's very easy to say we're against the Empire, especially because the characters that we love from the first book, Kalam and Fiddler, are just trying to kill the Empress. However, because Erikson is a naughty boy, he introduces us to Duker, who's extremely likable. He's extremely, like, charismatic, and he's extremely capable. One of the first things we introduce him is he's in disguise. He understands the Seven Seas culture. He immerses himself in it to like watch the Warlock do like the foreshadowing thing, like their version of the Deck of Dragons, where like they predict the future of like the woman in chains and then fire, which is important later, but I'm not going to spoil it. Come on. But we're introducing him. He's very likable. He cares about like the safety of the locals, and he thinks that like the Malazan rule will genuinely be better for the people, rather than an all-out war, a rebellion, a slaughtering of all these people. And like characters like Culp are very likable, and we're introduced to this Coltane and Bolt, who are like kind of mysterious. They're kind of like a little rough around the edges, but we know they're capable, and we want to root for them because they're badass. So it just like Erikson, like, he's like, oh, we hate the Empire, but we love this whole regiment, and don't you want to see them live? And that's how he gets you. Just one little character and one little POV is just enough to make everything confusing, because, like, we have that, right? So we want Kalam to kill the Empress, right? We want and honestly, too, because they want to kill the Empress, but they want the Malazans to win against the rebellion, which Kalam is, like, conflicted about. Because they think that, like, at the end of the day, Malazan rule is better. It's just the Empress that needs to go. So I guess it's just the Empress we hate, which is true. But then it's that. But we also hate, like, Tavor because she sent, like, Felicien in prison. And it's just, like, things aren't combining yet as they did in Gardens of the Moon with all the politics. But, like, there's just so many things going on at once, especially with, like, this path to ascendancy that all shapeshifters are going to. It seems unrelated, but like the fact that Mappo and Icarium are so closely linked, you know it's going to show up somewhere else. And I made the camera crooked in my rage. It's just so much. And it's classic Erikson style to throw this all at you at once. And I don't know what to say. It's so good, though. It's so good. I think I could definitely see someone being a lot more overwhelmed by this book than the last one, just in terms of like stuff being thrown at you, because at least in Gardens of the Moon, the one major goal was the Empire wants to take over Daruzhistan, and there was different politics of like how they want some characters, how they wanted it to be done, or like who wanted to stop it and the ways they wanted to stop it. But in general, that was the major conflict. Now we're not entirely sure if it's the Whirlwind versus the Empire, or it's Felicien escaping from prison, or it's the Empress getting assassinated, or it's preventing the shapeshifters from becoming God, or it's just getting to Aaron. I guess we'll see. That's all I got for you guys. This one was a little bit wild. I feel like the beginning of Malazan books are always super chaotic, a lot to work through, and just like the amount of like tabs I had just for this one. It's a lot. Even as a reread, it's a lot. And I want to know you guys' thoughts. If you're reading for the first time, what characters are you connecting to? I'm definitely connecting to Duker, but obviously like Kalam is so cool that I connect to him as well. And I also just think Felicien's story is so tragic. Because also too, not before I was gonna sign off, but like the thing that's interesting about her is there's a very quick dip in like her mental like acuity because of this like drug that she's been taking, because we are very quickly, she's very rude to Heberic in Bowden, but before that we learn that she's selling her body to save her friends, so it gives us this empathetic edge to her. And obviously from the very beginning she was like a little girl that's thrown into slavery. We're obviously empathetic, But I think it's very interesting setting all these seeds of like empathy. She's looking out for her friends. She's doing anything for her friends. She's selling herself for her friends. She doesn't really care about herself as much. And then there's this turn, like a chapter later, where she's like gets beat by Benneth, and like she's like overcome this drug. She can't even think. She's not smart anymore, and she just becomes like a stick in the mud essentially. And I think from this point forward, I think everyone should take a very deep look, if you're reading for the first time, about her journey from this point forward. Because like I said, she's a controversial character, and you'll see why. And this isn't really a spoiler. I just think that, like, from what I see on the internet, people are very, very critical of her character, which I think that in this part especially, it explains a lot about what happens with her. The way she started and the way she's ending up. Just keep that in mind. Obviously, I want to hear you guys' thoughts. I think this is a great book, and I think the start is extraordinarily strong with the world building and the continent building being an absolute highlight. But I want to hear what you guys think, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for sticking around.